Hello there, lovely listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I'm your host, Mark Talaga. So, today I thought we'd talk about something that a lot of people ask probably before they meet with me, or even just friends and family who talk to me about what I do, which is, well, how do I find a therapist for my kid? Especially if I have a gifted, asynchronous, neurodivergent, complicated child. What do I need to look for? What makes a successful therapist? What makes a therapist maybe fine, but not ideal? And what makes a straight up bad therapist? They're out there. Spoiler alert. I don't know what to tell you. It happens. So, for me, the first question that we have to dive into is what constitutes the need for a child to come into therapy? So, there's a lot of obvious answers, I guess, is the way to go about it, or maybe more prototypical answers if the child is having difficulties regulating mood at an extreme level. Their lows are really low, or their highs are really high, or there's patterns of behavioral outbursts and challenging behavior. They're getting physical in a level that's way outside of their developmental age, things like that, right? But for gifted kids, it's a little different. Sometimes parents are looking for support because they're just sensing a disconnect in the child. They're just not themselves, or they're feeling more distant and quiet, or they're feeling more anxious than I normally see. And it's hard to tell you exactly where that line is that you draw in the sand where you say you need help or you don't. And so, my big message for everyone listening today is it's not really about the kid. I mean, it is, but it's more about the parents or the providers or those that are working with that child. Sorry, take that again. It's more about the parents and providers, those that are working with the child. When you start to feel like I am in over my skis, or I'm struggling every day not knowing what kind of kid I'm going to get, or I'm just feeling like I'm at the end of my rope, I don't know what to do, that's more when I say, hey, you probably need more support. A therapist shouldn't be like this mechanic that you take your kid to once a week, you drop them off, they get tuned up and get sent out. Because in reality, we're not fixing anything. Your child is perfect just the way they are. What you're struggling with is the challenges that the unique nature of the child are presenting in a world that's not really built to support them or support you as a parent. And so it's more about monitoring your own feelings and reactions when you're feeling absolutely like you have no control over the situation, that I would say that's the time to reach out and start evaluating for a therapist that might be helping you. But you might say to me, but Mark, I have my own therapist. I use that therapist to work through my own issues. Sure. And I'm not saying that to, be rude to those of you that are doing the work and trying to better yourselves. To you, I actually say bravo. But the reality is you have to separate out this idea of I'm getting what I need in my own life, and my child just needs to get something in their own life, because you're interwoven whether you like it or not. And the idea is when you're looking for help for yourself in relation to your child, it can be separate issues of what you work on in your own personal therapy. Now, there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of things that come up for you as you're raising a child who's particularly challenging or gifted. And some of that stuff you can work out in your own therapy. But when you need support with the child, you need support for the child and yourself. And I say that because when people come in to work with us, we don't just take that child, put them in a black box, send them back to you, and give you no sense of what's being dealt with. We want to work with the entire family, and not just the family. We want to work with the family and the schools and the other professionals that may be involved, like psychiatrists or OTs or PTs or language therapists, whatever it is, tutors even, right? We're trying to create a team, a village. It's one of the things that a lot of people lament about lately, that our society has gotten away from a community-driven, helping one another type of mentality. And it's true, we have. And so recreating that in a world that is drifting away from it can feel very difficult and almost feel like you're doing something that's out of the norm and out of the zeitgeist. Oh, if you're looking for help in that way, things must be really bad. Not necessarily. You're just trying to create a team. And that team needs to be all working together and swimming in the same direction. And when you're looking for somebody to help on that team, you want somebody that is able to manage all the parts of the team. And so what I like to say is that, I'm not necessarily a therapist to gifted kids. I'm more like a quarterback who's trying to give direction to all those involved so that everybody feels like they have their role, their part, they know where their boundaries are, they know their purpose and what they're trying to accomplish. So it's not one person trying to do everything all at once, usually mom or dad, right? And the hardest part, I think, is the way therapy is presented is it's this kind of idea of you go to therapy to learn skills, to, feel better. And on some level, that's true. I think that is a byproduct of what we do here and what most therapists do. And even in my own therapy, that happened as well. But therapy needs to be re-seen as more, okay, you have somebody who is an expert in certain types of behaviors and development and psychological phenomenon who is working very diligently to understand all the different facets of the case. And so when you're looking for a therapist, one of the red flags, and again, this may come as a shot to some of the therapists that are doing this. I'm not really trying to come at you. I'm just trying to say that let me take that again. One of the red flags you got to look out for is that therapist working in isolation? Now, that's not necessarily a problem in and of itself. There are plenty of therapists that hang their shingle, work their own hours, do their own thing, and are very good at what they do within the right population, within the scope of what they're good at. But when you're working with complexity, you absolutely need to have a complex approach, meaning you have to have a team. I'm a big believer in that. And when you're looking for a therapist, one of the ways you can evaluate, how you're going to get some help from this person is, do they work with others in their practice? Are they under supervision? Do they collaborate on all cases? Do they have weekly meetings to discuss these things? Or are they working in a silo? And again, working in a silo is perfect for some people and a great fit for certain people that need certain, problems resolved. But I tend to push people towards the idea of, you're building a village, you're building a team, so go to a place that has a team approach. And there's a lot of great people that I'm, professional colleagues with who do this and do it very well. And they're not necessarily geared towards the gifted, but they understand the value of not working alone. And we want to practice what we preach. If we're trying to help our child learn how to integrate more into the world or learn how to first differentiate themselves, how do you do that with others? Because a lot of very brilliant people out there and a lot of gifted adults out there will probably testify to this. You try to sort everything out in your head. You internally process all of your own experiences, your own feelings to try to make sense of things. And that'll get you pretty far, especially if you're relatively good at it. But for the most part, you got these blind spots. And you need somebody to help you hold up a mirror to those blind spots, help you become more aware of those blind spots, because those blind spots are where a lot of our vulnerabilities lie and a lot of places where we need extra help. And the same thing goes with a professional therapist. If they're working alone, they will have blind spots, I should say. And again, maybe those blind spots don't get in the way of the scope of work they're doing, and it's perfectly fine. And that's great. But if you're working in complexity, or you're starting to work with systems and families and other professionals and schools, those blind spots are going to start to creep up and show their ugly heads and get in the way of the work you're trying to do. So first and foremost, if you're finding a therapist that works in a team environment with lots of support from their place of work and their clinic, that's great. That's a good first step. And you'll notice my first step isn't, do they know gifted? Because even though that's a very important piece to parents coming in and feeling validated about their experience and having somebody who knows what it's like and has seen it 1,000 times, that's also very helpful. To me, it's still more important that you're working with somebody who knows how to work with others, because then they can teach it, right? And that's really where a lot of gifted kids struggle. How do I connect with others? How do I understand that my differences sometimes creates me as an outcast when that is not my intention at all? But then, yes, number two, they need to know gifted. And they need to know gifted in the real neurological development of what it means to be a gifted child, how the brain functions, how asynchronous development works, right? And so there are therapists out there in gifted land who tend to skew more towards, giftedness is a celebration and it's wonderful and isn't it amazing? And if the world only knew, what I saw in you, everything would be great. And again, we don't want to dismiss the strengths-based approach and how that's very supporting of the child, but it's not the real experience. It's not the reason you come into our office. You come into our office because there's some level of pain there. So, this was taught to me by Andy Mahoney, the idea of when you're trying to sell something, and I know that sounds crazy to talk about therapy as selling something, but on some level, yes, I have to sell my skills. You have to buy that I have something to offer you. The way to sell something is to go in like a 3-step approach. You first start with what is the fear, right? What are people afraid of? And when they come into the office, they have a lot of fears. I'm afraid my child won't grow up and be happy. I'm afraid they won't be able to do certain things. I'm afraid they're going to shut down on opportunities that later in life they'll regret. And then underneath the fear, you go to the second step, the pain. You don't jump right to the pain, by the way. Not everybody's ready for that. You got to have a relationship first. But you have to have somebody that understands that there's real pain underneath that. I have pain in the idea that I don't know how to help my child. I have pain in the idea that I'm seeing my child be in pain, whether they're aware of it or not. I have pain in the idea that I am alone when it comes to helping my child in any sort of way that's been helpful for them. And then after the pain, you bring the hope. And here's why it's going to be okay. And here's how you deal with that. And here's how that very complex situation can be systematically dealt with, one step at a time. And it's not always a very clear cut, here are the 3 things you do and out you get and, go enjoy your life. Sometimes it's a very long process. And that's part of the reason that a lot of people don't want to go into therapy. Oh my gosh, it's going to be long and I'm not going to be understood. I'm going to have to talk about really uncomfortable things and I might have to face it. I have to change things. I take that into account when anybody walks in the room. You getting into the room, holy smokes, good for you. It takes a lot of bravery and a real sense of humbleness to be able to do that. And I think that's pretty impressive right off the get. And so if you have a therapist that understands the fears of gifted people, the pain that gifted people go through, and then understands how to create hope. And remember, hope is not some feeling you get. Hope is really just a pathway, a way forward, how you take this step by step by step. And if you have a therapist that understands all of those things, you're in the right spot. You're having somebody that can guide you through and validate and understand where you're coming from without telling you, oh, it's not that, it's this, and you don't need to be afraid of that, when they may actually be very upset. And you can't just skip over that. And you really have to be able to connect with them on the struggle that they're going through. And again, you can probably hear in my voice that I'm gearing this towards the parents, not as much towards the kids. And the reason is kids really struggle with that awareness piece around their own pain, around their own feelings. And it takes quite a while for them to develop language and have an understanding of that and to not just live so in the moment. A lot of kids will come in and be like, well, I'm okay today, so everything's good. And there's nothing to talk about, nothing to report. Meanwhile, mom and dad are sharing that there was a massive blow up and they started a fire in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like, it's not always straightforward when you're working with kids that you're going to get them to that level of awareness. But where you can start is with parents, and parents can start to feel like they have a better sense of what they need to know. And again, a lot of parents come in with the idea that, oh, you need to help me with my kid and don't worry about me. I'm just going to pull this Band-Aid. I'm going to tell you right now, too bad. If you're coming in to work with me or any one of our counselors here, we're going to help deal with you. And you have to, because our kids are a product of us. And our issues that we come into the world with are passed on to our kids, whether we realize it or not. It's not a bad thing. It's just how things work. And the fancy term is intergenerational transmission. The traumas and experiences of our ancestors passed down generation to generation to generation. And we can't continually feed it off onto the next generation, hoping that they deal with it. We have to take ownership as well, that we need to deal with whatever we're bringing into the mix. And so you have to look at family dynamics. And a lot of people are afraid to do that. Well, I don't want you looking at our marriage. I don't want you looking at how our family is. I don't want you looking at how our household is, because we know that it's not where it needs to be. That's okay. I'm here to take the shame out of any of that. We just need to deal with what is. And dealing with all these different parts is ultimately what helps that kid and helps us as counselors understand that kid. So again, when you're looking for a counselor, you want somebody that works collaboratively as a team, and you want somebody that understands the real experiences of gifted. And sometimes there's going to be counselors that do that really well without really understanding the world of gifted. They have this natural ability to bring people in and help them understand the root of issues and organize things without really understanding how the extremes maybe play a part. And so you'll notice I'm not about saying you have to work with somebody that knows gifted or else you're not going to get any help. I don't totally believe that. But I do believe there are also people that work with gifted and sell themselves as gifted therapists that also don't do that work, where they're really understanding the whole picture, the 360 approach. And so, I always work in ideals. What you're trying to find, yes, is the ideal. Are you going to always find it? No. And even, our practice here, we're not ideal in every single sense of the word. I'm not a perfect therapist. I have my own flaws. But we're trying to do the best that we can. And I want to give you a framework of what to look for. The other issue that we want to take a look at is, does that therapist know how to integrate testing? Do they know how to use the facts and figures of a learning profile, of a neuropsychological evaluation, and integrate it into the process? And it's not a make or break whether they can or can't, but if you find somebody that does, that's great news. Because again, what they're communicating through that practice is that we're not just going to go off of the psychological symptomology. We want to know everything that goes on with how that kid experiences the world. And the more data, the better. And so when you have therapists that work alongside evaluators or know how to take evaluation and make sense of it in real life context for what that kid is experiencing, that's another huge home run. And so, yes, we pride ourselves in being able to do that. And we teach our counselors here how to do that. But there are other counselors out in the world that also know how to do that. And again, what I'm trying to give you is a list of questions to evaluate therapists. Do you use testing in the counseling process? Do you integrate it in any real way? Do you help us make sense of it? Do you help the schools make sense of it? And the more therapists can say, oh, absolutely, that's great news, and you're heading in the right direction. And so you're always trying to find somebody that is not going to the quick diagnosis. Oh, well, these symptoms equal that. You want somebody that says, this smells a lot like ADHD, but we don't want to hang our hat that that's all we're dealing with. But perhaps an evaluation would be appropriate, and maybe we can look into it a little further. But we really want to understand all the different facets of what this kid operates by. But we really want to understand all the different facets of how this kid operates. And so a lot of parents get very nervous about this. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to make a lot of calls, or this is going to cost me a fortune, or, I need somebody that takes insurance, and that's going to, make it so a lot of my choices are off the table. Those are real concerns. And those are something you need to take into account. And again, you're dealing with complexity. And so solving a problem like this isn't always going to be easy. And a lot of those things really do matter. But I'll also put this on you. If you're paying out of pocket for a therapist, you might also look at, well, I have a high deductible and my sessions wouldn't really be covered anyway. Or, they only get covered for a certain amount of sessions and then afterwards I'm paying out of pocket. Or, can I work with a therapist on a sliding scale? And some do that as well. Or a lot of what we like to do is we try to figure out a way where we match the frequency and duration of the sessions to whatever the budget is. And so all I'm really saying in all this is finding somebody that's willing to understand that you have certain needs around finances and around what you're able to afford and how long that might last and what are the real expectations of, how we can help. And so, a lot of times I'll tell clients and give them a very realistic timeline of if you want to see real change in your child, and you want it to be not just symptoms getting better, but a real understanding of themselves and having the tools and strategies to start to advocate for themselves so they know how to be out in this world, probably takes 6 months to 2 years. And that's just a realistic timeline of what it might really take for somebody to develop what they need to develop. Sometimes it takes shorter, sometimes it takes longer. But I try to give people an understanding, and you want a therapist that gives you those guardrails and boundaries so you know what you're getting into. And now here's another really important thing you have to look for with a therapist. Can you communicate with them? Do you feel safe to communicate with them? Do you feel like if you ask them a question that you get ignored, or they get snippy with you, or they get really hard in their own boundaries and don't really listen to you? Well, that's a little tricky, because on some level, we have to be appropriate in what we're asking for of counselors. And another level, we have to have counselors that are willing to communicate. And so what you're looking for, again, is a counselor that's willing to be open in their communication. Now, on the flip side of that, you don't want a counselor that continually gives away their time hour after hour, and they don't charge, and they just give of themselves over and over, because those are too loose of boundaries if you're going to be a professional. That's my honest opinion. You also need somebody that knows themselves well enough and knows their value and worth, because that's a person who knows how to help build that in a child. We don't want to believe that therapists are these people that are in it for the money, because most of them aren't. I'm not. But the reality is, it is a part of the work. It's a business. It's my job. And I have to have boundaries around that. There is a part of me that I have to fight against that wants to just give away everything for free all the time, always. But then I devalue myself. And what am I really teaching you? Am I teaching that child that don't worry about yourself, just give to others all the time? That's probably not appropriate 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 times out of 100. And so it's okay to find somebody that is willing to have those boundaries around their own work, because it's a way we need to be in this world. We need to have a sense of our own value and what we're worth, so that we don't get taken advantage of or our vulnerabilities are exploited. And so you're looking for a therapist that can communicate things openly and honestly, even tough conversations like money and affordability. You want it to be an open conversation. And you want that therapist to hear you exactly where you are and know what needs to come next in order to make things happen. And so if you have a therapist that works collaboratively, that understands gifted to the sense of what it means to understand the experience and the complexity of it all, and they know how to integrate testing and data into their work, so it's not just about the psychobabble, and how they work very hard to stay in a communicative, open, boundary, I was going to say boundary heavy, but that's not really it. It's just boundary appropriate relationship. You are finding that unicorn that you're looking for. And also, you're looking for a therapist that is going to think a little bit outside the box. Talk therapy doesn't really work for every single person. It's effective and it's a very valuable tool, and it works a lot of the time for most people because it helps us process and express and make things explicit so that we can organize and understand the problems that we're dealing with. But for some people, talk therapy is straight up not going to work. There's some kids that struggle with language, expressive and receptive language processing. It's so difficult for them to be in a talk heavy session that sometimes therapists have to be okay thinking outside the box. What does this kid really need? Do they need somebody to play with them? Do they need somebody to draw with them? Do they need somebody to see where their potential lies? Do they need somebody to take them out on a walk, right? With parent permission, obviously. But the idea is you don't want to be so in a box when it comes to how you work with gifted kids, because we're not working at allaying all their psychological maladies. We're working with them in what it means to connect to another human being and grow and feel seen and heard, because those are the building blocks off which you can then build skill. But for some people, it takes a long time. And some parents want to know, what did we work on today? What did you teach them today? What were the goals today? And that's okay. I mean, I understand where that's coming from. You want to know, is there progress being made? Or are you just taking my kid back there and talking about Minecraft for an hour? But what if I told you, in certain contexts, talking about Minecraft for an hour is the most therapeutic approach? Now, it's got to be rooted in psychological theory. You have to understand why you're doing it. If you're just there to be a buddy, I mean, that's nice, but I don't know if you can really charge for that. But it probably doesn't hurt also. But sometimes we need kids to feel like they're in such a safe place that they can talk about anything. And our job is to pay attention to how they're talking, why they're talking, when they're talking, what they're not talking about, the tone in which they talk, because we can still glean a lot of information just by a conversation about Minecraft. And some kids have been so burned by therapists in the past, where the therapist has some sort of objective, something that they're trying to make happen, and the kid can feel it. And gifted kids can feel it especially more sensitively, because they're just attuned to having good, BS radars, right? They're aware when somebody's trying to manipulate them, as a master manipulator themselves, right? And so when therapists are caught in this place of trying to force an agenda, that can shut a kid down. And so we're not always there to force what needs to happen, even though we may understand what that kid needs ultimately in terms of skills and development. But we're also testing the waters of what can they handle. And a lot of times that comes in the format of the session. Yeah, you know what? Talk therapy is probably not a great idea right now. Or an hour is way too long for this kid. They got to limit it about 30 minutes. Or there is no way I can see this kid online. He has to be in person. And we're saying that not to make it harder on you as the parents, but we're saying that because we're trying to create a real connection with these kids so that they feel like they can be more of who they are and be more aware of those vulnerabilities and take in more of what we're seeing in them as well. And so don't get too concerned with the idea that a therapist is simply, only telling jokes the whole time. What you want the therapist to be able to do is explain their process. Why are they doing that? Where do they feel that kid is? What are they ultimately working towards without pushing it too fast, too far? And a lot of times I'll pivot. I'll say, you know what? This is all the kid needs right now. But I can tell you as the parent need a little bit more. So why don't we do this? We'll split the session. Half of it's going to go to that kid feeling like they're going to connect with me so that they feel safe and they feel heard. And then the other half is going to go towards you as mom and dad so that you have what you need, right? You have to have some level of flexibility in this world, working with therapists and knowing that it's not all grounded in, I'm going to teach them these 3 things and we're going to do social scenarios and we're going to drill, because not every kid is ready for that. Some are, by the way. Some love it. Some just want to know everything and everything that they can do to make things better in their lives. And, again, that's great. But a lot of these gifted kids really struggle in the therapeutic setting because you have somebody that doesn't really know what it means to connect and to listen and to get that a gifted kid is going to express things much differently, but it's all expression. A kid spins around in my office over and over and over. They're expressing something. They're trying to tell me something. They're giving me a glimpse into their world. And when you're trained to start to see what that might be, or what they're really trying to tell you, or when they're trying to take attention off of when I'm talking with mom and dad and bring it onto themselves, and mom and dad are getting upset and saying, please just let us talk. And I say, hey, it's okay. He's telling you something. There's something going on here. And so ultimately, when you leave the session as a parent, I want you feeling tucked in. I want you feeling supported. And I don't always do it perfectly. I'll be honest. I don't. Of course I don't. I can't hold myself to that standard of doing everything perfectly, but my intention is very clear. I want parents to feel taken care of first, and then we can help the kid. Because if the parents aren't okay, there's no way we're breaking into that kid. That's just the rule. The analogy I like to use all the time is what happens when oxygen pressure plummets on an airplane. The masks drop down, and what are the instructions? Put on your own mask first, and then your child's. And that's what I believe. We need to make sure mom and dad are okay. And if they say something along the lines of, well, I'll be okay when my kid's okay, that's not necessarily what I want them believing, but it also is telling me a lot about what they're up against. That they feel like I can't be okay until I know my kid's okay means they're really struggling. And I want them to be taken care of in our session. And I don't need to be their personal therapist. That's not what I'm after, by the way. But they are missing something in terms of their skills and their boundaries and their understanding of the situation. They're trying to control things that are uncontrollable. And I want to put them in a place where they're controlling things that they actually have control over, and how to delegate to other professionals, the schools and other doctors or adjunctive support, tutors, whatever it is, so that they don't have to do it all themselves. But that takes time and that takes work and that takes sorting through some things. And if you have a therapist that understands that, a therapist that understands the big picture and how all these different parts are important, but we're not going to do everything all at once. It's a bit like triage. We need to see where the work really needs to be. And sometimes those kids are more okay than you think, even though they might come apart and share that they don't want to be around anymore at nighttime, which is very scary for parents. But I would rather you as a parent feel like I know how to handle that, or I know what that's about, or I'm not so afraid of that anymore because I know what's really going on underneath, and then allowing me to do the work with the child. Okay. And so the idea here is when you're looking for a therapist, or when you're looking for any help in this life, truly look for somebody that's also going to take care of you, if not give you the priority. I think that really matters. And if you feel like a therapist isn't listening to you, or they're not taking your concerns in, or they're just wanting to make it all about the kid and not about what you're feeling, that's a red flag to me. And so any one of these different variables that you can assess for, I hope is helpful if you're out there looking for a therapist that maybe helps you on this journey. But remember the big piece. You're building a village and you're doing it together, and nobody does anything great alone. And when you start to really integrate that into your life, that's when the kid starts to pick up, hey, maybe there is something better to trying to fix this all on my own. Because remember, these kids are smart and they grow up being very smart and analytical, and they can make connections faster than any of us. And then they try to do it on their own. There's an entire, infinite void of knowledge and data and articles and things out there for how to better yourself. And a lot of people try to take that journey on by themselves. And all I will say is take that with a grain of salt. You have blind spots. You have people that can help you, but it is about finding the right help. It's about making that connection where it's a good fit. I feel like the therapist is doing what I need them to do, and they're taking care of me and my child and working well with the people in my life to make things better. And they feel like they have a sense of scope and expertise around what we're working on, and that this child is not out of their scope. And so maybe that's the last thing I'll put in there. If a therapist is taking on too much all the time, they're taking things in that are out of their scope, and they're trying to dismiss those things that are out of their scope to focus on what they are good at, that's trouble. And maybe this is just a message to therapists. Pay attention to your scope, what you're really able to handle, what's really within your expertise and your wheelhouse. And in that way, we can become better for helping anybody that comes into our door, whether they're gifted or not. Again, I hope this was helpful to all of you out there listening. I thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. As always, if you have questions, concerns, contradictions to anything I said today, please go to hopelesslygifted.com and fill out the little form at the bottom, and those questions go right to me. And I'd be happy to answer any of those on a future episode. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.